I think the way that Sapolsky describes it, depression is a disease that makes you incapable of enjoying a sunset.
That was Alok quoting from Robert Sapolsky's lecture on depression from Stanford University. In today's episode of Silent Superheroes, we'll be following Alok's long journey with major depressive disorder and dysthymia. From the first time he realized that he was depressed at school, through taking time out before going to college, and finally crafting a successful career in the workforce working in QA. Some of the things we'll cover are Alok's experiences with medication and the important difference between suicide as wanting death and simply wanting to not be alive. In many ways, Alok isn't a silent superhero. He's someone who talks freely and openly about his experiences with depression. In doing so, Alok creates space for others to ask him questions and to share their experiences. Alok made a big difference to my experience with depression. About 7 years ago, he sat me down and explained what it was like to go through a major depression. I didn't realize it at the time, but he was describing experiences I had had and experiences that would get worse over the coming years. But I'm grateful to Alok because through his courage in sitting down and sharing his experience, when somebody did say, "James, I think you've been in a major depression," I didn't feel quite so alone. Please remember that the people you hear on Silent Superheroes are discussing their personal experiences with mental health. If you're considering a change to your treatment plan, please consult with a trained medical professional. My name's James Pratt. I'm the host of Silent Superheroes, and I'm really glad that you're here.
Welcome to the Silent Superheroes Podcast, a series of frank conversations about mental health at work.
Welcome to Silent Superheroes. I'm here with today's guest, Alok. Alok and I are old friends. We've known each other for
10, 12 years?
I would
13
say
years?
12 feels about right.
Yeah. Something like that.
So I know you well,
yes.
but people who are listening would not know you well. So why don't you tell us who you are?
Does anyone really know anyone? I mean, yeah. Sorry. This is not Philosophy 101. I forgot. Yeah, okay. So my name's Alok, Indian-American gentleman. I grew up in Massachusetts, college in New Orleans, and then moved to Seattle after college. That was in 2003, and I've lived here ever since. So 15 years.
You know, we're talking about mental illness here. Why don't you tell us what your mental illness is?
What my damage is? Yeah, sure. So I have something that's called double depression. So it's dysthymia comorbid with major depressive disorder. People are probably familiar with major depressive disorder. Dysthymia is a lower grade, longer lasting form of depression. It lives on the bipolar spectrum. There's a converse condition against mania called euthymia, which is sort of like a low grade mania that people kind of live with for a while, but I have the other one. And the result of that is that you feel generally low, and then you have episodes of feeling very low. And then when you come out of your very low episode, you don't come back to your baseline is lower than other people's. So you end up kind of having a low grade to high grade depressive experience pretty much all the time. I also have some complex PTSD from various traumatic experiences in my youth. My mom was an alcoholic and was pretty abusive. It was a difficult time growing up. So I have a lot of PTSD type things around there. A lot less now. I've been in therapy for a very long time, but it's still definitely there.
So you said mentioned major depressive disorder. For somebody who doesn't know what that is,
Sure.
Why don't you talk to us about that?
Sure. Okay. So major depressive disorder is a mood disorder which causes short, sharp episodes of depression. I'm going to reference a video that I showed you a long time ago, which is it's up on YouTube. Dr. Robert Sapolsky, who's a primatologist at Stanford, recorded about an hour long lecture about depression in general and the cultural, contextual, and chemical influences and triggers where the current thinking is or where it was about 5-6 years ago. And I don't know that our understanding of depression has changed significantly. So depressive depressive episodes are marked by a few key symptoms. Not everyone displays all of those symptoms, but any depressive episode will probably have 2 to 3 or more of them. Anhedonia is kind of the one that a lot of people are familiar with. It's a inability to feel pleasure. The way that Sapolsky describes it in the video is depression is a disease that makes you incapable of enjoying a sunset. You're just not able to derive the kinds of satisfactions or pleasures from things that other people can. Another one is psychomotor retardation, which is a seeming sort of paralysis, not paralysis in terms of a actual like plegic condition, but it takes a great deal of energy to try to move. It takes a great deal of energy to try to get up or do anything.
Well, I would love to hear about your direct experience of those things.
Sure. So my depressive episodes tend to come in fairly distinct phases. And of course, we didn't talk about the big one, which was suicidal ideation and suicidality in general. When I start to idly ponder the end of my own life, that's around when I can start to tell, oh, okay, I think maybe an episode's coming on. And for me, it's a very non-dramatic thing. It's sort of like, oh, I could just die. Oh, right. Oh, yeah. All right. Yeah. That sounds fine. And it's not like associated with the plan. It's not associated with like I could just run off that bridge. Right. You know what I mean? It's more a sense of an ending to a pain that I'm feeling dimly. One of the things that's sort of interesting about depression is that it seems to interact with your brain's perception of pain, such that it triggers perceptions of pain without any kind of physical source. So you feel genuinely like you're in pain. You have all of the things that come along with pain, except for the actual physical sensation of it.
It's almost like the way you describe it, one might think of suicidal ideation as some kind of titanic, dramatic internal struggle. Right. But I'm hearing something a lot more matter of fact.
You know, I would say that I think that what you're describing exists too, and I've definitely had those moments. I've had some pretty despairing moments holding an implement or another, looking in a mirror at 3 a.m. and trying to make some very, very serious decisions very, very quickly.
Pretty serious decision.
It's a pretty serious decision, yeah. And for me, the ideation is separate from suicidality. And so I try to distinguish between the two.
So talk about like what's the ideation part?
And so for me, ideation is this thing where the feeling of wanting to not be alive, and I'm saying that very specifically in that way, it's not necessarily a feeling of wanting to die, wanting to have the experience of dying. It's the experience of wanting to be dead or to no longer be alive, which are different. The feeling of wanting to die is closer to that suicidality aspect, which is also present in other self-harming behaviors, self-medication, cutting, other stuff like that, where the point is a sort of self-inflicted masochism and an attempt to, and I liken it to trying to make yourself actually feel the pain that your brain is telling you you're having, which doesn't make sense that I feel like I'm in this enormous amount of pain and there's nothing seemingly wrong with me, and that incongruity is itself very disturbing, dissonant, and jarring.
And I think one of the things that depression does is it's like you know that what you're thinking doesn't make any sense, right? Or is in conflict with itself.
Yeah.
Worse.
And there is very much a delusionary quality to it. There was a time where depression was cataloged among other psychotic disorders because of depression's ability to disrupt rationality, to create kind of a delusional quality in one's thinking. It definitely has that impact, you know. In that way, and it's similar to some social anxieties, for example, where it doesn't matter how well your friends treat you or how much fun you have when you're with them. When you're thinking about going out, you're like, oh, nobody wants to see me anyway, and I'm not going to have a good time, and they all kind of hate me, and they're just putting up with me, and you know, there's no evidence for any of that. for any of that thinking. And there's quite a bit of evidence to disprove that kind of thinking. But when you're inside of that construct, all of the countervailing evidence is part of some sort of plot or wishful thinking, or the real truth is that you're alone, that no one else can understand you, that you're all by yourself, your experience is isolating, and that that's how it's always going to be. That's one of the other things about depression, I think, too, is that when I'm depressed, I cannot remember what it's like to be not depressed. It doesn't occur to me that there's ever been a time, and I can sort of dimly think like, oh, I think I wasn't depressed 3 weeks ago, but in the moment, what I'll think to myself is, no, I was. I just something good was happening then, and it was masked. Yeah. That's what was fake. This is what's real. Depression has this amazing ability to recast your entire experience and perception such that the depression is the only thing that's ever been real. And everything else, whatever else you thought was going on, no, you were fooling yourself. This is the only thing that's happening. And this kind of interminable, unendurable, formless pain and suffering.
I think it's important that we talk about suicide, something that around which there's still a huge amount of societal stigma. And I understand it. If you've never been there or been close, it doesn't make sense. Like, why would you take your own life? It's so precious, etc. So you mentioned, a metaphorical but also a real knife to the wrist or arm. Give me a sense of how frequently have you found yourself in that place?
I've never actually tried to kill myself. Well, let me say it this way. I've never actually taken a directly suicidal action.
Right. So that's what you call a suicide attempt.
Yes. Right. I have never done that.
Yeah.
I have done a lot of things that I very much hoped would end in my death and that were extremely destructive to myself and people around me, and that were very, very bad news.
What would be some examples if you're willing to talk about?
Getting real drunk, driving to the casino over a very long bridge. Hopefully I drive off the bridge, and if I don't manage to drive off the bridge, then at least I'll drunkenly gamble away a bunch of my money and make my life worse. And then, and then maybe I'll drive off the bridge on my way back.
Yeah.
You get a twofer. Please don't take away from that I'm like proud of that, or I tell that,
that's fair.
Or I tell that story as I tell this story as a example of extremely harmful and destructive things I've done. I do not tell that story as a example of what I've been able to get away with, or think of that as being anything other than a horrifically stupid,
thank you for that,
antisocial thing to do. Right?
Thank you for that nuance.
Yeah. I have done things that arguably should have ended in my death. I have stood there wanting to end my own life, but I've never actually made a direct suicide attempt.
Right.
But it's been close. It's one of the reasons I don't ever have a gun in the house or go anywhere where there is a gun in the house or that I know of, you know, and I don't, go to the gun range. I don't go shooting. I don't do it. I'm not putting myself in a position where it would be that easy, because I don't know. I don't know that I have the wherewithal to resist when it's that simple to cause yourself massive injury and damage. Yeah. Most of my abortive suicide attempts have been because I didn't have the right pills, or I didn't have them in the right dosage. So I'm really just going to make myself sick. There's no point in doing this. Yeah. Or I'm a coward and I don't want to tear my arm open, or the amount of time it'll take to run the bath is the amount of time it takes to reconsider briefly.
Right.
But I close run things, and I haven't felt like that in a little while, which is good. But that's not to say that I won't feel like that tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's always a possibility. It's always there.
Let's talk more about your direct experience with depression. How long does a depression last for you?
Weeks, months, years, sometimes. For me, it's an experience of years, especially because the dysthymia condition. So it's very hard to discern when I'm in kind of my long, low-grade depression, or I'm somewhere around the edges of a major depressive episode. The distinctions become very blurry at that point. I can definitely tell when I'm extra super duper depressed.
Right.
But I can't necessarily tell when I'm just coming out of it up to whatever my sort of normative baseline is, or when I'm sinking down a little bit, which is why depressions tend to come on me more unexpectedly than they can for other people. Now,
because
the experience of entering that episode feels very much like my everyday experience. There are a lot of people with major depressive disorder who just snap into depression, and that absolutely happens for sure. For myself and for a lot of other people, I think there's a kind of a feeling of a slide. You can feel it coming on. You're not quite there yet, and it's already starting, so you're not really going to be able to avoid it, but you can kind of feel that it's happening. When I'm in a dysthymic mode and I start moving into a depressive episode, I can't feel that slide. I can sort of tell something slightly different, but it's not enough to kind of permeate my conscious thought as much.
Kind of like you're in a noisy room and somebody's talking and you can hear it, but not really.
Yeah, or if you've got your music on and you've got your morning alarm set to kind of slowly increase. Right. Yep. And your morning music is full of bleeps and bloops. And so
isn't it some kind of electronica or something?
And so it sounds basically exactly like that. And it's not until like the thing is blowing up that you're like, oh, okay.
Yep.
That thing's happening now.
Yep.
But by the time you're aware of it, that thing is happening.
Wow, I wish I got up 15 minutes ago.
Yeah. Sure.
Not everybody who lives with depression ends up with suicidal thoughts or taking suicidal actions. But when you do talk about depression, it's a topic that comes up a lot. As Alok describes it, suicide isn't about wanting the sensation of death. Suicide comes from the pain getting so much that not being alive just seems like a better alternative than being alive. But I think that raises the question, how do you get there? How do you get to the place where the pain is so much that staying alive just doesn't seem like an option? So this has been a long journey for you. So why don't you talk us through, or let's go back to when you were first diagnosed with depression or dysthymia or whatever, wherever it was it started.
Why don't I go back a little farther than that, and I'll tell you about when I first knew that I was depressed, because it had a extremely specific onset, and I recall it quite distinctly.
Okay.
I was 13, and there was a girl I liked at school. I wanted to ask her out. And I think the school period before I was going to do that, I asked a mutual friend of ours if she thought that the girl in question would be receptive to my no doubt smooth and suave advances. Our mutual friend told me, our other mutual friend, my best friend at school, just asked her out and they're going out now. And I was like, okay, that sucks, but hey, I like both of them. Good for them. And I went through the rest of my day and was like, yeah, it's sad, but it doesn't matter. I went home. I did my homework, went to sleep, woke up and was in the throes of a horrific depression. And upon waking up, I knew something had radically changed, And it's not too uncommon for puberty and for trauma to cause depressive onset.
So I could see what you've described there is the experience a lot of people go through in high school, grade school, whatever it might be, right?
Yes.
So what is it that's different about your experience than that typical teenage ups and downs?
Sure. There's a term that both you and I are fond of from our long history of arguing about English football, which is bounce back ability. Everybody has low moments. Everybody has disappointments. Everybody has traumas. Everybody has things that don't go the way and you get sad about it and you cry about it and it sucks. Yeah. And then you get over it. You work through that emotion. You find out that it didn't kill you. And in a very real sense, you're able to kind of put it away. Right. It diminishes to a point where you're able to put that experience into a context, get closure on it or whatever it is, and put it aside. Depression takes that ability away. You aren't able to get over things. You don't return to a baseline of, well, I'm basically fine. Or that was out of my control. That didn't have anything to do with me. I made all the good decisions I can make, and that and I have perspective on this, and and I can serenity prayer my way out of this thing, and that's and that's fine, right? Yeah. Depression holds you in that spot of pain. So anyway, so that happened, and I was just like immediately horrifically depressed for basically the next 10 years or something like that. When I was 16, I had a nervous breakdown. I really don't remember like my senior year of high school. My senior year was 16 to 17, and I can remember like 3 days from that year. I was in a terrible fugue state. I was quite a mess. Eventually, I ended up taking like I think it was like an AP exam or something like that, going home and then just not going back to school for 2 weeks.
Wow.
Just being unable to move, being unable to get up. Like anything. That's around the time when my parents were like, okay, maybe we should go take this person to a doctor. It was as a result of that was the first time that I saw a psychiatrist or psychologist and got diagnosed. The psychiatrist that I saw was a friend of the family, was not very good, and put me on Zoloft immediately, which was about the worst thing he could have done in that scenario.
When you say not very good, what didn't he do that you now hope he would have done?
He was not terribly interested in my experience so much as he was in diagnosing me and providing the effective pharmacological remedy. It has not been my experience in the many decades of therapy that I have been through that there are as many pill prescribers as people often fear. I have mostly found people who are more interested in combinations of talk therapy and medication and so on and so forth, which I think
it feels like that's almost something that one should watch for, you know. I think a lot of people fear, if I go to the psychiatrist or the psychologist, they'll just send me away with some pills, and I don't want my brain messed with. I think a lot of people fear, right?
Which I think is hilarious because, like, why not?
Yes.
What's it doing for you that's so good right now?
Yeah, exactly right. But yeah, I think I would be cautious if I went to see somebody and that was their first reaction. They didn't more deeply explore what's going on.
Most definitely. Yeah. And that experience, what I was going to say is that it has not been my experience that that's very common. Yeah. It is unfortunate that was in fact my first experience. And I've had a couple similar run-ins since then. I am better prepared for them now than I used to be, where I can kind of definitively say, like, no, medication is not what's happening right now. Like, I need to get a handle on the therapeutic side of it first and make sure that I'm talking to somebody that I trust and that I'm developing tools to work through this stuff. Medication I have found at times to be very, very helpful, quite important to my various therapies. I've never had an experience of just being able to take medication and have that be, you know.
You showed there a lot of awareness that I think's been taking you some time to build up about what's going on for you.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like, this is something that needs talk therapy versus this is something that you can throw a tablet at.
Yeah. To be a little more concrete about that, there have been medications that I've taken that have really reduced my suicidality or suicidal ideation, where those thoughts still occur, but they don't gain purchase. I don't ruminate on them in the same way as I do in an untreated capacity. And it's very clearly an effect of the medication. Yeah. So
because I know you've tried a lot of different medications. So what have you found helps you with that?
So, Wellbutrin, bupropion, is the one that has been the most efficacious for me. I have a very good friend for whom Wellbutrin is death. And they're on Effexor, which I have tried twice and I've had two of the worst experiences of my life on. Again, everybody experience is different. Everybody's confluence of disorders is different. What works for one person is not necessarily going to work for another person. And that's why you stay with it and try, and to the best of your ability. I'm never going to get mad at anybody for when they say, like, I'm not taking anything right now. I'm not taking anything right now.
Right. That makes it hard, I think, sometimes for, you're in this state where you've gone to get help. You realize there's something that's just not right. It's not working for you. and someone gives you a pill and maybe they say, or maybe you have the idea that like, oh, this will make things better, right? This will make my headache go away, right? You know, I'm taking ibuprofen, my headache goes away. And it has some bad side effects, right? Some consequences to it. And that can be pretty scary when what you're hoping is, I'll get better.
So like I got prescribed that Zoloft back when I was 17. I took it, and that night I had one of the worst suicidal episodes of my life. Like I had to hold myself completely still in my bed for like 12 hours, 14 hours, because otherwise the only thing I was going to do was get up and go get a knife. Right. Like that was it. That was my first experience in medication. My second one, I got put on Effexor, and it really fucked with me, and I hated it. So how was I able? Why did I even give it a third shot?
Yeah, right. Why keep going?
Why would I do that? For me, it was because the suffering that I was experiencing was so significant. I cap out on the inventories. You know, if I take the Beck depression inventory, my high score out of 50 is 49. There was a period of time when one of the only real joys I felt was in like breaking my record on the inventory, right? While trying to be honest, of course. Don't lie to your doctors. But yeah.
And very briefly, I mean, that inventory, what is that?
There are a lot of different sort of short tests that you can take to kind of gauge a depression level. One of my doctors has a short inventory for anxiety and depression that he administers. It's a very short questionnaire. It takes like 5 minutes to fill out. And that he administers every time I see him, such that he has kind of a trend line and he has a baseline from the initial visit, and then a trend line like going up and down, and being able to kind of monitor the condition metrically. And this is a way of getting at that small up, small down in a controlled fashion. But anyway, because I was in such a severe depression, I was having a terrible time at school. Took a year off between high school and college because much to my parents' chagrin, because I absolutely knew I would kill myself if I went to school. Like I just was not able to put myself in that kind of like new stress, brand new environment, etc. It would have been quite detrimental to me, and I could kind of tell that.
You said you haven't had those thoughts in a while, and you know, I would note that you've been in a pretty stable relationship for a while. I'm just wondering if like there's any correlation, causation.
It's funny. My therapist actually said that to me the last time that I saw him. I've been seeing him for 9 years. I've had a very long, fruitful therapeutic relationship with him. If he were allowed to talk about his experience with me, which he's not, he would tell you that the first few years were extremely frustrating. It was I was very resistant to methodologies and treatments and things like that. And so he made the point like, oh, you've been in a good relationship for a couple of years. Like that helps. And it is true that has helped. It's one more route. It's one more unambiguously good thing that's kind of lean on in those times. But by the same token, I wouldn't be able to have had that relationship if I hadn't done a whole bunch of work on myself. If I hadn't gotten myself to a point where that was plausible for me to be anything other than a completely shitty partner in a relationship. If I hadn't worked very hard and frustratingly and agonizingly through a lot of things, and not just depression stuff, but the PTSD stuff really rears its head in some of the relationship things, stuff like that. Then I wouldn't have been able to enter into something that had potential. It's less a chicken and egg thing than a feedback loop, but there's a certain amount of, you know, I need a lot of things to be going right in my life to be able to say, like, I'm doing okay. And right now I'm doing okay. I have a job that I really like. I have a girlfriend that I really like. I have an apartment that I really like. It's very messy and is filth because I'm still a depressed asshole, but, you know, I still like it. You know, when I was in a relationship I really liked, but my job wasn't very good, that sucked. When I was in a job that I liked, but I wasn't in a relationship, that wasn't great. You know, wasn't seeing anybody, was feeling isolated, you know, whatever. So a lot of things have to kind of be in place. And this is the real, you know, kind of shitty trick about things like depression is that you get the spokes kicked out of one of those things and all of them can go away. You can't trust yourself to be able to be like, oh, well, if I get demoted or I get laid off from work, then I'll be fine. I'll just get another job. No, I'm going to be probably, you know, odds are even that I'll be on the couch for 3 months.
It's that idea of bounce back ability. You know, for some people, relationship breaking up would suck. you'd get back on, on track, in a month or two, get fired from your job. Mm-hmm. You get back on track in a month or two. But for you, once one thing goes, it's just significantly harder for you to bounce back and get back to normal.
Traumas expand in the mind, and your ability to recover from trauma is diminished.
What I'm hearing is you've put a lot of work in over 25-ish years.
Yep.
Right. Just to find out what medication works, to connect with a therapist that's, and
again, I'm not taking anything right now, but
right. Yeah, absolutely. That, to understanding how you show up in a relationship and how that supports or doesn't support your condition. What other things are part or have been part of that program, if you like, for keeping yourself in a, functioning state?
It really is it's doing work. Yeah. Knowing that there's work to do, wanting to do work. And I don't mean wanting in the sense of, you have to want to get better.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't mean it in the sense of, if you just wanted to not be depressed, then you wouldn't be depressed. That's not what I'm fucking saying. I hope that's clear. I mean pushing through and even faking it just because the alternatives are shit too.
So there's Alok's 25-year journey of trying different psychiatrists, therapists, medication, and building an awareness of his internal state and the tools he needs to help manage it. Most important of all, how he's applied grit in his darkest moments. Through all this, Alok became a productive member of the workforce. So I wanted to learn more about that experience and how major depressive disorder and dysthymia have affected his ability to be successful at work. You've used the word work to describe everything you have done and everything you continue to do to show up in the way that you do. Mm-hmm. And part of this conversation is about work and the place you go every day and the thing that you do that you get paid for. Mm-hmm. What do you do?
Sure.
What do you do for work?
I work at a IT company. We work with some IBM solutions for enterprise companies and help them figure out where their screws and people are and how to get the people to the screws and how to get the people and the screws over to the thing that
you
they
make it sound magical.
It is. It's I think so. I work in a mobile studio attached to the main company that works with this database, and we make mobile applications that plug into that database. So I think sometimes people do think like, oh, it's magic. Like we talk to the sky, and the sky tells us where we're supposed to go.
Right. And what do you do for that company?
So there I am the test process and internal products manager. So I help design and maintain the framework applications that we use and customize for various clients. I implement agile systems and other development and business processes for streamlining work and so on. And then I am the test manager of my robust test department of one person, which is me.
What would you say it takes to be successful doing that kind of work?
Each one kind of requires some slightly different tools, but attention to detail, I think, is the biggest one, which is funny because I don't know that I have a ton of it. But the ability to keep a lot of moving parts in your head and to be able to navigate through different thought processes and kind of hold one over here and think about this other one at the same time. And any given day, never mind any given week, I'm probably working on somewhere between 3 and 5 things at once, all of which may pop up kind of suddenly, or something may require me to put what I'm doing aside and attend to this thing and then move back.
So you're keeping track of a lot of different things that are happening. There's lots of change, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so a good memory is very helpful in this context.
Okay.
The ability to switch focuses, which I am emphatically not that great at. So this is one of the ways in which it is challenging to do what I do with the stuff that I have, because I can get distracted very easily. Or if I'm ruminating, or my thought process is kind of swirling around in a depressive haze, or I'm recycling suicidal ideation thoughts and things like that, it's kind of hard to, tear away from that number 15 tickets or write out a bunch of user stories or something like that, right?
It's hard.
Yeah.
But?
I don't know. It's hard.
Okay.
I would say it's just hard.
Okay. Well, I guess the open but was, I assume you get on with it.
Yeah. I do my best. Work has been a struggle for me for a long time, and a lot of the therapeutic work that I've done has kind of paved the way for my ability to be marginally successful at my job. I think that my issues with depression have been very detrimental to my ability to even try to build a career or try to find a work that is satisfying or to be satisfactory at work. I've definitely struggled my way through a lot of jobs where I did enough and other people were relatively happy with what I was doing, or maybe not as happy with what I was doing, but I was kind of staying above water, but only just.
Yeah.
I have never been at a job where somebody hasn't had to take me aside at some point and say, hey, it seems like you're not really here right now. It seems like you're not really doing the things that you need to be doing. And other people are starting to kind of notice and are starting to kind of be affected. I spent a lot of time kicking myself and regretting how much depression has taken away from me in terms of being able to really put my energy or thought process to work in other environments. If you're spending all your time thinking about one thing, you're not spending it thinking about other stuff, right? And in a field where it's about your thought process and it's about what you can kind of conceive of and make manifest, an inability to apply your thinking to the project or to the work is very difficult, right? It's very detrimental. And I very often wonder, where would I be if I hadn't spent so very many years using 95% of my brain to keep myself from dying? I was able to give more than 5%, 10% of my energy over to learning a new coding language or taking a business class or getting more involved in other facets of my workplace or studio or whatever, so that I could be more well-rounded. What if I had the ability to really do that? Do I get on with it? Yes, I do get on with it ultimately in the end. But when I think about it, the things I think about aren't, oh, I'm getting on with it. Yeah. It's much more about how I've been able to progress to some degree in my area or field or what have you. I've been able to pick things up and apply them and retain them and reuse them such that I'm adding value and creating efficiencies and all that. I'm luckily at a place where when people have had to talk to me about my performance or where they've been dissatisfied and I've made concrete and visible changes, that they've been able to put that stuff away. And okay, you're back. Good. Yeah. Great. Yeah. There's the person we hired. Yeah. Awesome. And I've had my boss also sit me down and say, like, I've had these issues too. Like I don't claim to know how you experience it, but I want to be sympathetic to you. I also need things to keep moving. That's a line to walk, you know, and it's hard to kind of enforce a certain amount of discipline or a certain amount of productivity while still being sympathetic to the fact that people are different. And I'm much more of like a burst kind of worker, right? Like I'll sit there, I won't seem to be doing anything for a little bit, and then all of a sudden like 15 hours, 20 hours a day, you know, like just plow through it and then be like, oh, okay, well, it's time to hibernate again. You know what I mean? Like I like the place I am. They seem to like me. I don't want to do something to like trigger somebody's prejudices or mess things up in that way. And then what inevitably happens is that because I talk about this in a number of other contexts, somebody's like, oh yeah, no, I know you're depressed.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh,
Right.
right. Yeah, of course you do. Because I don't hide it at all.
Yeah. Yeah. You're very much out with depression.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. And I made a conscious choice to do that a long time ago, you know. For the most part, I think that that's been good. I think that I have been able to be a resource for other people who are kind of struggling with a thing. I've had a few coworkers pull me aside and say, like, the fact that you just kind of talk about being depressed while we're sitting in the row, we're testing something or whatever. And,
Right.
and you'll just talk about like, oh yeah, I was at my therapist yesterday and you know, I'm trying this new thing out and it sucks, whatever. And the fact that you're just so open and kind of casual about it
Right.
made me realize that I could just go to the doctor and go get some help with some things. And I'm actually feeling better. And, you know, that's great.
That's great.
And yeah. And you know, those are big wins for, I feel those as successes, as workplace successes, you know.
We talked a lot about the challenges that you face
Right.
and the work that you put in, and you have and are, and I hope will continue to be successful in what you do for the most part.
Sure.
And in part, I think, because of the sheer amount of effort you put in to showing up in the way that you do.
Yeah. Tried very hard to improve my ability to cope with this stuff in all aspects of my life. Not just to reduce its influence, although that's always nice. But when that's not possible, not to slam my head against that wall, but to try to work with it. You know, I often describe it as a terminal condition, which is not quite right, but is not that far off. It's certainly a chronic and incurable condition, let's say. And so with the fact that this is just going to happen, accept that and find ways to manage, you know, and find ways to get stuff going. I try to let people know that positive reinforcement or positive feedback is very helpful for me because I'm not very good at being able to determine on my own that I'm doing well or that I'm doing the right things, you know. It might genuinely be the first time it's occurred to me that I might have done a good job of the thing.
Right.
You know, I might be incapable of thinking that I did a good job on it.
You know, if you think about a work environment where you can truly thrive, what else would help and support you as somebody with, you know, dysthymia and major depressive disorder in the workplace?
Yeah. So one of the things that's really helpful is that my workplace has a fairly flexible work from home policy. Everybody kind of just gets a day a week to work from home. You can take other ones during the week if you really need them, but try to keep it to a day kind of thing. But if you need a second one, it's not like the end of the world or anything. Most people in my office have set days, right? They're just not in the office on Thursday. They're not in the office on Wednesdays, whatever. And very often that ends up being a day that they have childcare that day but I tend to use it more as a floating during the week. Well, I'm not feeling great one of these days. I use it for other things too, but I try to keep it flexible for that because that's a thing, right?
Yeah. How does that help? Like you're feeling, you know, maybe I'm heading into depression here, or there's a thought pattern here that I'm uncomfortable with. Like, how does being able to work from home help you?
Well, you know, in a very real sense, if I don't feel like I can get out of bed, then I don't have to. Now, it's still difficult to take the 3 steps over to the bag and go get my laptop and come back to lying down. But that at least is more plausible or manageable than get dressed, get ready, you know, all that stuff. I live close to work, so I'm walking, you know, or if you're driving or trying to take the bus without people around, or, you know, any of those kinds of things, right? I try to be conscious of the fact that because I'm also a manager and spearhead a lot of projects, that people need to interact with me. Yeah. And so it can be difficult when one of those kinds of days runs headlong into you have meetings all day.
Yeah, right.
kind of days, right? You know, and in those scenarios, what I usually try to do is just try to do your best to push it aside. Yeah. You know, do your absolute best to kind of just hold it in place. Yeah. Get through your 8 hours. Yeah. Then go be miserable. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. And not everybody can do that. And I can't do that a lot of the time. Yeah. But, you know, if I'm able to do that, then that's kind of how I try to manage it. This is all still a work in progress for me. Like, let me be clear. Like, I don't have it fucking figured out. Yeah.
Nor does anyone, right?
Right. But I have some systems that I've managed to develop agonizingly over a long period of time that allow me to hold things off, but they're not systems that prevent me from being depressed at work, right? Yeah. There's no power on earth can do that.
Exactly.
They are really just like cognitive behavioral therapy, like style algorithms of, okay, when you're stuck, when you can't think of anything new, when your brain's a fog, up on my whiteboard, here's a list of things in priority.
Right.
Just do the first one.
Or
just go look at the first one.
Yeah, go look at it.
Just go look at whatever that thing is, you know?
Then maybe do it.
And then maybe do it, right?
Yeah.
But at least you took stock of it. At least you did something, right?
It's like breaking things down into very small.
Right. It helps that I, do agile systems stuff. And a big part of that is that kind of chunking process, right? I'm testing this big feature and I'm going to have to spend like 7 hours just setting up the test environment and all of the circumstances. And that just seems like a lot.
Right.
All right. Skip that one. Yeah. That one's documentation, right? Yeah. Go write a couple paragraphs about something. Okay, you can't write. Okay, this one's review a document. Yeah. Just go read it. All right, you can't do that either. Okay, and maybe you can't do any of it.
Yeah.
Maybe you can't.
Right.
That might happen. That does happen.
Yeah.
But having done some amount of pre-thinking to prepare for those moments. When I talk about doing the work in general with the therapy and everything else, that's what I'm talking about, is just preparing myself for sort of muscle memory reactions to things that are going to happen again.
If you had just got in a car accident.
Sure.
Right. And there was that meeting and it was really important. And he said, I'm really sorry, I just got in a car accident. Mm-hmm. Most workplaces and most colleagues would be like, oh my, like, go take care of that thing.
Right.
Like, this work is not important anymore.
Right.
What do you think's different about, I am in a major depression right now and functioning for me is extremely difficult?
I don't think there's anything different. And I'm seeing that change to some degree. In Seattle, the idea of taking a mental health day is a lot more common than it used to be, especially because there are a lot of places that have very kind of lackadaisical attitudes to things like, and if you're sick one day, you don't like take it off the schedule, you just come in that day. And if you're not doing it too often or whatever, then it's fine. It doesn't matter. The difference between a migraine or a massive allergy attack and a major depression or some sort of mental health debilitation is pretty minimal. I am not able to come in and focus the way that I need to be. I can maybe I can come in and mark time, but that's not actually doing anybody any favors. The thing I try to be aware of, if I'm able to go in and be at least like available to other people, that's marginally better. Yeah. I still might be able to answer somebody's question and that's good, right? Or I still might be able to weigh in on some issue. Okay, it's better, right? So I try to keep that in mind, especially, again, because I work in a small studio and I have a lot of stuff that's just under my purview. So there aren't other people that can necessarily answer that. The reason that anybody treats mental health differently than other things always comes back down to stigma, right? Yeah. It just comes back down to the idea that mental health is under our control in some way that physical health is not. And there's a lot of reasons for that, right? There's a whole Enlightenment Renaissance philosophy of, Cartesian mind-body dualism that means that we tend to think of the mind as being more powerful and more important, and the body is kind of the thing that betrays us. And this is especially prominent in IT fields, right? Like your body is basically just a meat puppet. And then, mental health is scary. People's experiences are mental, right? They're perceptual. Yeah. They're based in a type of rationality. They're filtered through our brains. And something that has no obvious corresponding physical evidence that is unpredictable by its nature, that is unseen, not verifiable.
Yeah. There's no test, right? There's no...
Yeah. Especially in a suspicious workplace where people are like, are you really just trying to skive off work? You know what I mean? Or are you just malingering, like, kind of thing? You seem fine. Like, how can,
because of all the effort.
Right, sure. Well, or just because you have no idea what not fine looks like.
Yeah. Let's go back to stigma. You described mental illness and mental health as being a little scary. And perhaps some of those experiences people have had are, somebody, for example, who maybe has psychosis, which can be very, very scary. To be around. Yep. Perhaps they've had a family member, an uncle who was talked about in hushed tones because he was in the hospital.
Right.
What else contributes to the stigma?
In this country, we have an ingrained and presupposed kind of Puritan work ethic culture that's very much about get on with it. One of the most complimentary things you can say about somebody is they never missed a day of work in their life, right? Like that's that idea of getting on with it. Nose to the grindstone, just do your job, contribute to your society, your community, or whatever. None of that jives all that well with my brain hurts and I need to lie down. And it looks like laziness. If you come from a perspective where not standing on your feet and doing the thing is strength and anything else is weakness.
And yet, what I've heard is a story of strength. Strength in terms of courage, in terms of, grit at times to persevere and to keep going.
Right. There's absolutely nothing weak about surviving this thing, and there's nothing weak about not surviving this thing. Right. Obviously, I'm biased. Honestly, I dare anybody to spend a lot of time staring into the abyss of your own mortality and wanting it and preventing yourself from having it and tell me that that's not some sort of act of will, which is not to say that people who commit suicide have therefore succumbed or that they are therefore weak or anything. I'm definitely not saying that.
What would you say as somebody with depression? What is it that you want your coworkers to accept?
That I'm still me in here somewhere, even when it doesn't really look like it. It requires a certain amount of faith to believe that somebody who changes so dramatically, as people in depressive episodes often do, it seems to be completely different people. It can be hard to have faith that the person that you've been working with all this time didn't just suddenly disappear and that they're coming back. But I think that that's important to be able to do. Not in this, and when I say that, I don't mean in the sense of I need you to stop putting responsibilities on my plate. I need you to stop asking me to do stuff. I need you to, ease up on me or anything. I'm not saying that. I'm saying mood disorders are hard to deal with because personality changes are scary. It doesn't make sense. Right? Why is this person suddenly angry? I think understanding is important. Doing some research. I have a coworker who has a significant physical disability. I spent a little time just seeing what that thing is, right? Like, I'm not going to be an expert on it by any means, right? But I can learn a little bit about, here's what this thing is. Oh, okay. Sometimes people have to physically arrange themselves in a certain way in order to deal with that. I didn't know that before, right? Now I know that, right? More understanding is never bad.
I'm thinking about colleagues that you work with who know that you have depression. They might feel like they want to talk about it or acknowledge it, but don't know how. So how would you like people to talk about your depression with you and kind of acknowledge and recognize it?
I'm in a bit of an interesting situation with regard to this because I am really open about it. Perhaps unfortunately so. People pretty often, actually, a coworker of mine just, shot me a message on Slack. We were talking about something else. And oh, by the way, I was listening to that episode of your podcast and I think it's really cool how you're really open about this stuff. Another coworker messaged me and was just like, hey, so what can you tell me about these medications? Do you know anything about do you know anything about them? Have you had any experience with them? What's that like, right? My impression from what I can gather is that people feel pretty free to kind of talk to me about it. Obviously, most people aren't going to be in that situation.
Yeah. You've created that situation.
Yes. I've deliberately created that situation. It was a very, very conscious decision on my part to, if I can abuse the metaphor of the closet for a moment, to not be circumspect about it, precisely to reject the idea of stigma around it. It does not seem to me to be a thing that should have a stigma attached to it. And so I do my best to, I don't always succeed, but I do my best to act as though there isn't. Yeah, it's just part of my shit. If you want to talk about it, that's cool. If not, not. But, I'm not pretending that it's not happening.
Right. You're choosing to show up as you.
Right. And this is a big part of it. This is a very central and core piece of how I got to wherever it is that I am. Other people are obviously not in that situation, and quite rightly so, for any number of reasons. Prescribe any kind of like one-size-fits-all way of trying to talk to somebody.
You may or may not be somebody who wants to talk about it. You may not want to talk about it right now just because you're in a depression, and like that's a lot to deal with. So if there was someone listening to this conversation fairly recently diagnosed with, with depression, dysthymia, or both, what would you have them know? I
hate the phrase, it gets better. It can be manageable, and it can get better.
Yeah.
I would say that I have gotten better. There is absolutely no way that I felt like that for the vast majority of my life. Anybody who would have told me that, I would have dismissed immediately.
Yeah.
And there was no guarantee that I was going to feel better, right? The fact that I do now is interesting. But what doesn't go away is your tools and the framework and the repertoire that you construct for yourself to the best of your ability to manage the thing. Those things can be improved upon. Those things can be practiced and can be crafted and can be used and reused and can make things incrementally more manageable.
Yeah.
And it gets manageable is something that I do think can happen, right?
Maybe less scary as it gets less manageable.
Sure.
More manageable,
I think that better might be a product of more manageable. Can't prove that, and I wouldn't sign my name to it. But it is possible to live with this, even though everything about it is telling you there is no living with this.
Right.
It is possible to live with this in such a way as to derive satisfactions from your life in other aspects. It is possible to remember that depression is a liar even when it's lying to you. And sometimes I don't even really like that whole depression is a liar thing because it doesn't feel like a lie, right?
Yeah.
Like that's not very helpful to somebody in that perspective. The reason I keep talking about the work, and I don't mean the work it must be a constructed professional therapeutic experience, but the work as the act of building those kinds of tools for yourself is because I believe that the only way out is through, and that the application of your energy and your effort to the problem is itself salutary, even if it doesn't fix anything. Your ability to deal is a muscle. Depression atrophies that muscle. Working on managing your depression rebuilds that muscle. So it's a mental therapy in the same way as you might use PT for a leg that was broken for a long time, and you have to rebuild a whole bunch of shit, and nothing works the way that it's supposed to, and it's very frustrating and might not get better, right? There is something maybe only ephemerally valuable, but there is something valuable about applying yourself to the issue in whatever way that manifests for you. I'm certainly not prescribing any specific fortune cookie wisdom. The act of that working has a beneficial effect, I think. I don't know that it has an ameliorating effect. I don't know that it has a curative effect, but there's something beneficial about it. If you stay with that, you'll perceive that benefit, I do believe.
Right.
Is that enough for you? I don't know. Is that satisfying enough? Is that sufficient? I don't know. I can't say any of that.
Yeah.
I couldn't say any of that. I wouldn't. But some benefit will be tangible to you, I think is true. And that's the best I can do.
Keep working at it. It's fortune cookie wisdom there.
Very unsatisfying fortune cookie wisdom, I suspect.
Alok, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for your vulnerability. Thank you for the courage in the work that you do. And I hope we keep being able to have these conversations in the future.
You're making me blush. I'm Indian, you can't tell, but it's happening. Thanks, James. Appreciate it.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
And that's Alok's story. A long battle with major depressive disorder, dysthymia, and complex PTSD. Alok showed me that by talking about our mental health, we can reduce the stigma. And for those of us who live with a mental illness, it can help you feel less alone. If you've liked what you've heard today in Silent Superheroes, please take a moment to leave us a rating on iTunes or your favorite podcasting service. You can also sign up for our newsletter at silentsuperheroes.com, and you can follow us at facebook.com/Silent Superheroes. And while you're there, you can leave a comment about what you thought about the show.
Take your mental health seriously. If you need to speak to someone, you can call 1-800 273-8255 or text crisistextline.org at 741-741. Both provide 24/7 confidential counseling to people in the United States. Worldwide, visit iasp.info/resources/crisis_centers/. To help others find the Silent Superheroes podcast, please leave a review on iTunes or your favorite podcasting service.